Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, today we continue our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Now, in today's program, I want to look at a couple of different topics. The first one is going to be the devastating Russian airstrikes that have occurred in and around Kiev within the last 24 or so hours. Obviously, we have seen the Ukrainian strike on Sevastopol and the Crimean Peninsula against Russian targets. We have now seen the Russians strike back at some of the most sensitive targets possible in Kiev. Our understanding that the headquarters for the SBU, the GUR, among other command and control nodes, were destroyed. There is reports that indicate Western intelligence personnel were among the casualties in some of these buildings and bunkers. Now, we also understand that some of the most advanced weapon systems available to the Russian Federation could have been used in this strike. Our understanding is that the Ukrainian air defense network was unaware it was under attack when the missiles hit Kiev. Now, are we seeing the use of new hypersonic weapon systems? Low observable drones? Quite possibly. Kiev has a very robust air defense network, or had a very robust air defense network thanks to NATO and the support of the United States. Now, the question is, does that exist as of today, after these strikes? Some would say maybe not. Some of these strikes and some of these buildings that were hit were buildings and targets that some have asked, why have these targets not been hit earlier? Well, they've been hit now. Our understanding is that the Russians are now targeting senior leadership officials of the Ukrainian state. Now, does that include Zelensky? Quite possibly. Quite possibly. But we know the Russians are now looking to eliminate the heads of the various Ukrainian intelligence organizations, intelligence apparatus, military officials, heads of the ground forces, special operations forces, airborne forces. That is now occurring. And again, highly possible, we've started to see weapon systems now being used that we have not seen used in the past. Secondly, the Russian military industrial capacity. I've had the opportunity to watch some mainstream media journalists, military analysts take a look at Russian tank production. And because the delivery to the Russian military in terms of tanks, let's just take, for example, the Russian T-90, that really went into heavy production in the mid-1990s. Developed well before that, but went in production in the mid-1990s. The Russians have not produced a lot of those systems for domestic use, probably anywhere from 400 to 700 prior to the war starting. Now, these analysts take that number in terms of Russian tanks produced for the Russian state, the Russian Ministry of Defense, its ground forces, that is a production capacity of the Russian military-industrial complex. And it's simply not true. What oftentimes people do not look at is the production levels for other nation states. The deployment of the T-90, not just for Russia, but for other countries, is much, much higher than what the production is for just the Russian Federation. They're still being produced in Russia. They're just being shipped elsewhere to countries such as India. I believe at this point, India is the largest user of the T-90 main battle tank, with over 1,000 systems delivered and or produced under license in India. But not only that, countries such as Algeria has hundreds of T-90s, Syria, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Armenia, the former Soviet states, Kazakhstan, Vietnam. So thousands of these tanks have been produced for these other countries. Now, they were not delivered to Russia, but it shows that the Russians have the production capacity to produce these tanks at a much higher rate than what most Western analysts fully understand. And that's not even in a wartime footing. The Russian military budget has ballooned from 60 to 80 to, some sources believe now, 140 billion, if not more, all the way to 200 billion US dollars. That is a massive infusion of treasure for the Russian military. That is going to allow the mass production of these tanks on a scale that has not been seen. You would have to go back to Soviet times to see the level of production that is now ramping up in the Russian Federation. Massive. So if the Russians are able to produce, and my whole point being this, hundreds to thousands of these T-90s to these other states and provide support for the upkeep of these systems, the idea that the Russians could not start mass producing these T-90s on a scale not seen before is simply preposterous. It's happening. We're seeing it happen. And not just with, again, the T-90 is just a case in point. But this also includes missiles, artillery, armored infantry fighting vehicles, aircraft. When the will and financial means are there, the West has awakened a giant. I mean, it's only going to get worse. I stick to my contention that the Ukrainian state is going to lose this war. Because the Russians cannot lose this war. It is much more in the Russian best interest to be victorious than it is for the West to provide weapon systems and treasure to the Ukrainians to make them victorious. Now, obviously, we are moving towards the direct use of Western forces in this war, which is going to ignite global world war. It's coming. We're heading in that direction. It's happening. Now, the real question, have the Russians taken the gloves off? With these newest strikes on Kiev, and more importantly, the anticipation of a massive Russian offensive towards Kharkov, and quite possibly discussions about a Russian offensive in the direction of Odessa. What are the Russians planning? Well, we don't know at this point. But we are certainly going to continue to watch, report, and bring you more content for your consumption. Thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have a good day.